Hello everyone, and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar, What is Epilepsy and How to Support Someone Living with Epilepsy in Your Workplace. I'm Stephanie Morawski from WorkSafe Tasmania and I will be your moderator. Before we start, please take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. I'll now explain how to participate in today's webinar. Please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit questions at any time during today's webinar. Questions will be addressed at the end of today's presentation. Only presenter webcams will be used and today's webinar is being recorded. I would now like to introduce your presenter from Epilepsy Tasmania, Wendy Groot. Wendy is Chief Executive Officer at Epilepsy Tasmania. She has lived in Tasmania her entire life and her family of origin were Norfolk Island convicts, then settlers. Wendy has worked in community-based organisations for most of her working life. She is the proud parent of 2 children, 2 great-grandchildren and 2 grand fur babies. Wendy lives in the Coal Valley and proudly states that her dad, who was a Dutchman and blacksmith, made the copper spire on the Catholic Church. Wendy has been working with Epilepsy Tasmania for almost 7 years and believes very strongly about Epilepsy Tasmania being a place where all people living with and those around them have equitable access to participate as they want to live their best lives. Welcome, Wendy.
But great to be doing this webinar with you all. It's that time of the afternoon where we want to nap, so I've got the lollipop to keep us all awake. So the format for this afternoon is we have a couple of video presentations that we're going to show you, and then we have a presentation from Amy, who is a peer support worker with Epilepsy Tasmania. So she's going to talk about her experience of living with epilepsy and also her experience of being in other workplaces other than epilepsy, and why it's important and has been important for her in her journey. So we'll just continue on. So Epilepsy Tasmania is a community-based organisation. It's been, we call them not-for-loss rather than not-for-profit these days. It's been around in Tasmania for almost 50 years. And we're statewide, having offices located in the north and in the south, and then we outreach to other parts of the island with staff situated in different places around Tasmania. So our primary function is to help improve the quality of life and community participation of Tasmanians living with or affected by epilepsy, particularly relevant for this WorkSafe month with your theme of safe bodies and safe minds. So we'll hopefully unpack that a little bit this afternoon. There is a lot of information on the slides. I won't be reading through all of the slides, or else you will all need more than my lollipop to keep you awake. But it'll just give you an idea and a bit of an overview as well. And it's really important to have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. So I'll just hand back. So Epilepsy Tasmania, oh, sorry, hand back. We've got the video to go first before this one. So I've got the video now, if we can, please, Stephanie.
How was your first day?
It was good. Everyone was having fun.
How was swimming?
It was good. I got splashed.
So, did you get the job?
They said they'd call me.
It's hard to flourish with a label over your head. No one with epilepsy should go it alone. Go to epilepsytasmania.org.au.
So that video is a short version. There is a longer version that we have as well, but pretty much that's the journey that many people with epilepsy experience in their life, from feeling like they're being left out of activities at school, going through employment opportunities and not getting jobs without people actually being able to name what those issues are. So we're going to unpack some of the reasons why that exists and what it is that hopefully we can all do to address that through the next little while. It's not going to the next slide. Okay. So epilepsy, now I've gone too far. Excuse me for mucking you up here. So epilepsy across Tasmania. So we've got a poll that we're going to do now. So wonder if Stephanie, if you could run the poll for us now, and then we'll come back and look at some of the questions. So just to give you an idea about what sort of knowledge you have, so that if need be, I can readdress some of the conversations. So.
All right, thanks, Wendy. So we've launched the first poll asking, what is epilepsy? So we'll close the poll in a minute. So I'll close the poll, Wendy, and I'll share the results.
Correct. You're all very knowledgeable on epilepsy. Yes, it is a disorder of the brain. That's correct.
All right. We'll run the second poll. So the second poll is asking how many people in Tasmania have epilepsy. We'll close the poll in a few seconds. I'll close the poll and share the results.
You're pretty close. Yes, it's so the number of people who actually live with epilepsy. So it's 1 in 25 people across Australia have epilepsy at some point in their lifetime. So you're looking at over 20,000 in Tasmania. So yes, that's you're right on the mark.
All right. We'll do the third poll, Wendy.
Okay.
And this poll is asking, what age is epilepsy most common? We'll close the poll in a few seconds. I'll close the poll, Wendy, and share the results.
Thank you. Yes, epilepsy has often been understood to be predominantly with the 0 to 17-year-olds. That's correct, but it has actually shifted significantly in recent years, and it's now very prevalent with 60 to 84-year-olds, almost as equally as it is with children now. And there's a predominantly high number in the 35 to 59, particularly 59-year-olds, particularly around males. The reason why the 60 to 84-year-olds have increased is because there are some links with dementia, but it's also as a result of people having falls, and the result of falls does actually bring through some injuries which can bring on epilepsy seizures in people. So there's a shift that we've just recently moved to in relation to that age demographic.
Thanks, Wendy. And we'll now launch the final poll. So the final poll is asking, do people with epilepsy have the same employment opportunities as everyone else? We'll close the poll in a few seconds. We'll close the poll and share the results.
That's correct, they don't. In one of the latest, we've just done some Tasmanian research as well, so people in Tasmania and across the country don't have the same opportunities, but the interesting factor in that is that at least 38% of people that we've spoken to in one of our polls in the last 12 has experienced some discrimination either in their workplace or in the community in the last 12 months. So we've still got a lot of work to do to raise awareness around that. So this slide caps on what we've been talking about, which is sort of 20,000 Tasmanians. But one of the things that we often don't recognise is how many people within the support network for people with epilepsy, and most people have around 4 people with them. So within the population of Tasmania, you're really looking at about a fifth of Tasmania's population, which is quite extraordinarily high, and it's second to dementia across the community, as well as the highest in terms of chronic disease and chronic illness. So, and people with epilepsy experience more common issues in terms of depression, heart disease, arthritis, and other things that affect their quality of life. So thank you for doing the poll, and hopefully we'll move forward and you pop questions up as we go, and we'll answer those as we get to the end with Stephanie. So moving on to the next slide. So what do we do? So just very quickly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. So we work very much around, to use the jargon, which is important jargon, we're very much about a person-centred approach, so that people with epilepsy, we always say that you're a person before you are the condition that you have. And very much everybody with epilepsy has different experiences and different needs. So the individualised support and family support that people need is very high. Advocacy is a very, very big part of what we do in terms of trying to enable people with epilepsy to find their voice and to know how to express that voice. It's not about us doing that for them, it's about us doing it with them and encouraging that to happen. One of the important components is a short video that we'll be showing later on from one of our educators. Education and training are really important around that. So the education, which is pretty well what today is about, which is just information, passing through to information to you and informing you of what we do, and then hopefully encouraging you to take some training to develop your skills so that you have both information and you have skills developed to be able to do what you need to do. If you have somebody within your workplace with epilepsy, or you encounter somebody in the street who has unfortunately has a seizure, which is not uncommon for some people to encounter that. Many people with epilepsy have emergency medication. So it's only about 60–65% of people with epilepsy that it's controlled by medication. And then there's particular ways around that, how that medication is administered, particularly in emergency setting. But for the other component of people, the over 30–40% of people where their medication doesn't work, it's really important that people have an idea of what they need to be able to do to be able to assist somebody if they're having issues with their epilepsy outside in the community. So we provide a whole lot of information resources. There's a whole lot of stuff on our website if you haven't already seen. We have some absolutely amazing podcasts that have only been developed in the last couple of years, and they're people with epilepsy who are basically telling their stories, talking about what epilepsy means for them. There's a neurologist that's also has done a podcast, but it's just people talking about what does epilepsy look like for them, what matters for them, and then where do we move with them to help them to have the support that they need. Amy's has a podcast on the website, but Amy is also is employed as part of the peer support program, which is about people supporting each other with their lived experience. One of the other really important things that we do is work very strongly within the community, so that the community as a whole understands and is aware of what's happening with you, with somebody with epilepsy. And so we don't have experiences that we have heard of where somebody will have a seizure in a fairly public place, and because nobody knows what to do, the police get called and that person ends up in police doing what they need to be doing, obviously. but there are other measurements that could be taken in those sorts of situations where we can be supporting people by having a bit more of a community approach to what we do. So you can't read the small slides underneath here, but I don't know about you, but I know for me that a lot of what's going on in my life, I'm often describe myself as some days I'm just that duck that looks very calm from the shoulders up, but underneath I'm paddling like mad, trying to work through the things that are going on in my life, both internally and externally. And so we often use the term of an iceberg when we're talking about people with living with epilepsy, in terms of the impact that you can only see a very small amount. And usually what you can see are the actual seizure themselves and the results of somebody having had a seizure. But what we don't see that's happening, which is actually the really important part for us supporting people in workplaces and community, is that sometimes people do have a memory loss. There was a person once told me that when the sorts of seizures that they had, when they came out of their seizure, they had complete memory loss and were not able to recognise their immediate family around them for quite some time. And so that family, once they'd learnt that, they developed ways of being able to facilitate that for the person with epilepsy to feel safe and secure while they were working through that process of their memory returning. Some people have a very strong sense of tiredness and fatigue. There is one workplace in Tasmania that has had somebody working with them in their workplace who, what they need when they're having a seizure or when their seizure's completed, is they just need to go and have a lie down and have a rest for a while. And this workplace actually converted one of their storage rooms, put in the appropriate lighting and ventilation, and they put a bed in as well as a trigger alarm, and this person with epilepsy was able to go and have a rest in the workplace, knowing that somebody would come and check on them, and also knowing that the workplace had the confidence that this was what they wanted to do, and this is how they wanted to support that person in their workplace. So medication has a really big impact for people. Some people, it can actually, medication can cause significant mood swings for a short period of time. It can affect people's behaviours. Some people have to go through multiple different medications in order to find one that works for them, and there can be many side effects in result of that. And so it's important to have those conversations with people to know that they are trying to land on a medication if they're fortunate enough to find one that works. But to recognise that these are some of the conversations to have with people about if they're disclosing about it, do you have other things that we need to be aware of to look out for to support you. Anxieties are really right up there. Unfortunately, when people experience increased anxiety, it can actually increase seizure activity. So being able to help people and we experienced that a lot through the heightened period of last year, when people were isolated in ways that we all didn't want. I think we all had heightened anxieties at some point in time through the last 18 months or so. Self-esteem is an issue because for many people, they sometimes, like the video at the beginning was titled "A Label on Your Head." Sometimes people feel like they're walking around with a label on their head, and they feel self-conscious and insecure around that, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't disclose about their epilepsy, because they think people might think differently because of that. And so that's, again, being aware that it does impact on people's feelings of self-worth, value, self-esteem, but also because of the unpredictable nature of seizures, it's really hard sometimes to feel confident in yourself, not knowing whether there's a seizure around the corner. The stigma is very, very high, as I've said before. This talks about 58% of those within the last 12 months. So that's when we've last asked people, which was previous 12 months. It has actually decreased to 38%. So that's helpful for us. We hope that still continues to be the case. One of the ways that a lot of us don't like the word stigma anymore. We use other phrases. So a bit further on in here, I talk a little bit about people with epilepsy describe themselves as having a life interrupted. And all of us have our lives interrupted in various ways, but people with epilepsy very much talk about how their life is constantly being interrupted. And many times they have no control or choice of that because of the nature of how their epilepsy exists within their life. So not everybody with epilepsy has seizures. That's a bit of a, not everybody who has seizures goes on to be diagnosed with epilepsy. So we work with people who have seizures only. So that's sort of a physical sign that there's been a disruption to the normal way that somebody might function. There are over 35 different sorts of seizures that people can have. So if you can imagine that across a spectrum of a wide range of people, many people will experience seizures that nobody else will experience a seizure in the same way. I was talking to somebody recently who was walking down the street with their partner, and they were chattering away, and their partner wasn't answering questions. They couldn't understand why. They came to the traffic lights, and the person who was talking stopped for the traffic lights. The person who they were talking to didn't, and one of the reasons was that they were actually having a seizure at the time. They're having what's called an absent seizure, which means that there's no real physical sign unless you're really looking for it about that. So it's about recognising the normal functioning that exists within us, but a seizure actually disrupts that normal functioning. Epilepsy is diagnosed when there's multiple seizures recurring on a regular basis. So you need to have a number of seizures in a particular period of time before it's diagnosed as epilepsy, which can be incredibly difficult for people because it can be a long time before the seizures are actually diagnosed as epilepsy through whatever medical interventions and ECGs and all sorts of things that have to happen for that to be the case. So some of the things that happen, so if you're looking at this slide, people have what's called an epilepsy management plan, and Amy will no doubt talk about that when she speaks. One of the things we encourage is for all workplaces, if somebody is comfortable identifying that they have epilepsy and they'd like some support in the workplace, as said before, not everybody has that experience because of a number of different reasons, and it's around the sort of the culture that we develop in our workplace as well, where we all feel that if there's something that we need to disclose around our own health and well-being, that we feel safe and we feel that there are appropriate ways that we can do that in the workplace. So it's not only for people with epilepsy around people being able to disclose their health and well-being, and thus the theme for your Work Safe Month about safe bodies and safe minds. So people come to us and they will talk to us about what their diagnosis is. As I said, that's a specialist diagnosis by a neurologist. They may or may not be on emergency medication. Most people with epilepsy will have some sort of trigger that they can identify. Some people it can be a noise, some people it can be light, some people it can be an aura, it can just be a sensation. So there are things that can be triggered if that's what sets off your epilepsy. So being in a space where you've got lots of flashing lights, if that's a trigger for you, then that's an issue. For people in workplaces, sometimes people need a special screen on their laptop to help them with the light from the laptop so that trigger doesn't happen for them. Temperature is a significant one, so particularly with children in school, if they're doing a lot of running around doing sport, that increased temperature can actually trigger a seizure for some people, and the opposite can happen. So it's about being able to have conversations with people about what things trigger you in terms of your epilepsy so that you do start to feel unwell. As I said, some people have signs prior to a seizure, which can be an aura. There can be a number of other things. It's really important that people describe what their seizure looks like, and then if there needs to be an emergency response and some support, and then post-support after it. There's also a number of things that can happen in terms of risk and safety issues. So we go into workplaces, schools and homes and talk with them about being able to do things in your workplace that makes it safe. So for example, which way does a toilet door open? So things like that, where are the curvatures on the desks? Are there head height things that people can bump into that can actually cause an injury that may set off trigger. So there's a number of things that we can do to come in and say, here's a way to have an audit of your workplace, and here's some simple things that you might be able to do for your workplace. A lot of people have downloaded the seizure first aid posters. Poster on the wall is great, but having the skills developed with you with those posters is also a really important part. So this is what, you can't read this intentionally. This is just to show you the complexity of what an epilepsy management plan looks like. So it's a 2-page document. It's filled out. We can work with people to fill out their epilepsy management plans, but it must be signed off by a GP or a specialist. But with GPs and specialists being time poor, one of the things that we can offer is being able to help people to write up those plans so they're individualised for their needs, as said before, is really important. And then people can have those confidentially within their workplaces if anybody's needed. But they also identify where there's some particular training that the workplace might benefit from, in particular to the nature of epilepsy that the person working there might have. Again, this is just to give you an example of what again, I'm not going through this in great detail because it's too important to do that. But just to give you an idea that there are a number of different sorts of first aid that can be identified that people might need. This person's having what's called a tonic-clonic seizure, which is the most common one that we all know, which is where somebody falls to the ground and they thrash around, and it becomes quite obvious they can have other things that can happen to their body as a result of it. And there are some particular things that need to happen in that process. So we do a lot of, so this can be a sort of an hour session in a workplace of working through all of these injuries issues, talking through a lot of the myths that exist around first aid. One of the really big ones that still exists out there is that people still think that it's okay to put a spoon in somebody's mouth to stop them from breaking their teeth. Well, actually, to stop them from swallowing their tongue, where actually they're breaking their teeth as a result of it. So that's really important that people don't do that. There's also particular issues around water, but again, that's more detailed than what the intention of this education and information session is about today. So people who have impaired awareness, sometimes there are different reasons around why we do that. So as I said, the impaired awareness is the example that I gave before of the person walking down the street. One of the things that was really important is, there's a spelling mistake on that, ignore that. I think it's hiding behind the little boy. Is that people can actually hear you when they're having a seizure, and it's a known fact that talking to somebody who's having a seizure, using their name, naming the fact that they are having an epilepsy seizure and you are there, can actually significantly help the duration of their seizure, but also help them emotionally when they return from the seizure. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time now. This is about 5 minutes. So we have two educators, a registered nurse and a social worker. So I just wanted to show you, it's a Q&A, goes for about 5 minutes with our trainer nurse, Emma. So Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind pressing play for that video, please, that would be great.
Hello, Epilepsy Tasmania, Emma speaking. Registered paediatric nurse, so I've got over 20 years experience looking after kids in my nursing career. I've been with Epilepsy Tasmania for the last 18 months. I'm an education and training coordinator for the north of the state. So we offer a range of training depending on what people's experiences are with epilepsy. The most common training is a basic understanding and management of epilepsy and seizures, which explains what epilepsy is, what seizures are, some seizure first aid, and also how to care for individuals with epilepsy and how they're impacted and how their life's impacted when they're not having seizures, because that's really quite significant for people living with epilepsy. We also also provide specific training for people looking after people with epilepsy around their specific individual epilepsy management plan, so how they specifically want to be looked after. And then as the nurse for Epilepsy Tasmania, my role is also to provide training around emergency medications and administering emergency medications when people are having seizures to help stop that seizure or reduce the length of the time that seizure goes for. So that's training people that are unfamiliar with giving medications to people and to make them feel confident in giving that medication safely. Our training is for some understanding for people living with epilepsy, what epilepsy and seizures mean for them, for the family and carers of them people, but also for the greater community supporting them people living with epilepsy. So workplaces and schools, care organisations, anyone really that is impacted by someone that has epilepsy or is experiencing seizures. We do a lot of education with people with epilepsy, because a lot of the times they get an epilepsy diagnosis and they don't actually understand much about that, or they might have had that diagnosis for a really long time, and sometimes the terminology and knowledge and things around epilepsy has changed significantly since the information that they were first provided with. They might have been diagnosed as a child and so didn't actually get any education or information, just had their diagnosis, and now that they're an adult they want to know a little bit more and understand what epilepsy means a little bit more. So it is with the individual, but it's a lot more with the support workers and the carers and the people that are involved with those people. We are really flexible with our training options, so we can provide face-to-face training. We like to get out as much as we can. You get a lot more out of that face-to-face training where you can sit with people and have that conversation, and it sort of generates a little bit of open discussion. So we do encourage face-to-face training where we can. We're doing a lot of training via Zoom or any sort of video link. We can also offer online training for people that have need to do it in their own time. So yeah, we can be really flexible with our training options. Well, again, we've got really flexible accessibility, so people can walk in our door, they can ring us up, they can email us, they can jump on the website, they can jump on our Facebook page, and all of them places will come to us and we will respond within hopefully 24, 48 hours. Absolutely. So it's a really fantastic job because you get to such diversity in what you do. We cover a really broad spectrum of people from all walks of life. So it's never boring. Every day is different. You get to get out and about. You get to go into school environments and workplaces and places that you probably wouldn't access otherwise. And you get to make a significant impact in people's lives and make a real positive change and just support them to live a better life. So I remember one of my first clients was a 17-year-old girl that was really struggling with a recent diagnosis, and it had just completely changed her life. So she'd gone from, starting uni, getting a licence, becoming independent, to having an epilepsy diagnosis and losing her licence, not being able to go to uni at that stage because her seizures were too complicated, and also their social impacts. So she was struggling with the friendship groups and going out and drinking and partying as goes along with being that age and not being able to do any of that. And then also her wanting to get a bit of independence, and so her mum became really wrap her into cotton wool, and she was feeling that she didn't have any independence and she'd lost everything. And so I met with her and her mum to start with, and then she actually started engaging with me outside of visits with her mum, and we talked about some of the issues that she was having that she didn't want to discuss with her mum around alcohol and party drugs and things like that. And so I actually supported her and started going to the neurology appointments with her so that she could ask the doctor them them questions that she couldn't ask when mum was in them appointments. And then I was also able to support mum in knowing that, you know, someone was with her child, and she was very grateful from that side of things, knowing that while her child was pushing her away at that time, there was someone there that was supporting her. So that she wasn't alone at that time. And, you know, and she's back, she's well controlled on medication now, she's back at uni, she's driving, she's working again, and she's really sort of thrived even after a diagnosis at that age.
So when that was the outside view of the Launceston office, and one of our favourite Tasmanian musicians kindly allowed us to use his music for that as well. So that's you can view that video at any time as well outside of today. So now I'm going to hand over to Amy, and she's going to pop her camera on. So as I said, we don't like discrimination, stigma and things like that in terms of our language, trying to change our language to try to engage more with people within the community, but also people with epilepsy. So our phrase these days is called a life interrupted. So over to you, Amy. I'll turn my camera off and then let Amy tell a little bit about her story and why workplace awareness has been important for her. So thank you, Amy.
Great, thanks, Wendy. And I may reiterate a little bit of what you've already said, Wendy, so I'm sorry for that. Okay, so I'd like to also say, please feel free to ask me any questions as well, because I'm very open to that. My story, just a little bit of my story, I guess, is that I'm in my late 40s. And 15 years ago, I was due to have a colonoscopy, and the liquid preparation caused me to have my very first tonic-clonic seizure. I then continued to have more of these. They were always nocturnal, and they still are always nocturnal. And in the first year, I lived in denial, as I didn't want to accept that I have epilepsy. So there was a lot there that I needed to work through, and not always easy. Based on a week of monitoring at the Royal Melbourne, it was found that I also have complex partial seizures. However, as these two are nocturnal, and given the type of seizure they are, I never truly know when I might have had one, except I can wake up sometimes with some sort of feeling of fuzziness in my head, and I might be a little bit more forgetful than usual. In an effort to be seizure-free, I had brain surgery. I had a lesionectomy at Melbourne Private 5 years ago. And in the first year after this surgery, I was able to take a smaller quantity of anticonvulsants and wasn't aware of having any seizures. So I was very, very excited, thinking that I had solved the problem and I was going to be seizure-free. However, on the very first night after following the neurologist's instructions and slowly weaning myself off the anticonvulsants, I had a massive tonic-clonic and knew that I'd need to come to terms with the fact that I live with uncontrolled epilepsy, and it's just about how to manage that. And since then, on average, I have about 5 tonic-clonics a year, and then an unknown amount of complex partial seizures. As Wendy said, my role here at Epilepsy Tasmania is peer support and volunteer project coordinator. I've been in this role now for about 2.5 months. Before that, I was working in management roles at the University of Tasmania for almost 24 years. So it's a real juggling act between the fact that you've got epilepsy and you're in a role such as that, where you're in a leadership role, you've got teams, and you're also then an employee. And I guess, you know, it does then come into your mind very often about whether or not you do disclose that you've got epilepsy. And I think, you know, that's because those of us with epilepsy have an immense fear about losing our jobs if we do disclose, and about our medical condition. It can also be about our relationship with our employer, with our direct report, and we're, I guess, scared that that will then put the label on us and we will be then treated differently. So, you know, it's great the work that Epilepsy Tasmania are doing, because it does then raise awareness, and it raises training and acceptance as well, and that's a very big need. So I think how to support someone living with epilepsy in the workplace. I think if you're their employer, build a strong, trustworthy relationship. If you do know, if they do disclose that they've got epilepsy, then you'll be able to hopefully have an open communication with them, so that they can confidentially discuss their medical condition with you. Also then, if they do have an EMP that Wendy discussed, an epilepsy management plan, this can be a great framework for that discussion, if they are comfortable with sharing that with you, because then you can talk it through with them, and they can explain it from their perspective, and then you're giving them the voice that they need, and they can then let you know what it is they might need in the workplace from you, and then also if they want to disclose to their colleagues. Also too, it's really important for both colleagues and employers to show respect, and by seeing these people for their skills, their experience, their ideas, their attributes, and the benefits that they're bringing to the position and the organisation. Please don't identify them or label them according to their medical condition. They are so much more than that, and they've got so much to give. Everyone living with epilepsy has different seizures, as Wendy has explained, and so it's different for all of them, and the impact of it is different for all of them. So it's great then if you do have a good working relationship and you can have that confidential discussion and find out from their perspective. They may need a day off after a seizure in order to sleep and recover, or they may be able to keep working but have a fuzzy mind. They may sort of look at you with a sort of a look that's a little bit glazed over, and so they might be a little bit vague and a little bit forgetful. As long as you're accepting, as long as you're patient with them, they'll work their way out of that. That's what they're doing. They are the iceberg, and they are working their way out of it. So yeah, please remember that. And you know, it might be that they are a little bit fuzzy-minded for a while. The person living with epilepsy will be very, very grateful to you for being accepted. And as an employee, if they do have that good working relationship with you, if they do sense that you are truly respecting them and understanding them, or endeavouring to understand from their perspective, they'll be even more committed to the workplace and to the position. Also too, as Wendy did state, seizures can impact people's confidence greatly because it gives you that sense of the unknown, that you really do not know what's coming next. And then if you, as their leader, if you do know they've had a seizure, provide them with positive reinforcement after that. That will greatly help them to get their confidence up again. Also too, if you have a staff member who does, or a colleague who does disclose that they have daytime seizures, then it's about ensuring that the space is physically safe, removing sharp edges, avoiding lone working so that someone else can help if they do have a seizure, maybe exchanging some tasks of the job with another employee's tasks. Make sure that they take necessary breaks. Drink fluids. Fluids can be very, very important, being hydrated for people with epilepsy. Pace themselves if they are tired, and also ensuring they're not under too much stress, because stress is really usually a very, very big trigger for people with epilepsy. Also, as Wendy stated, flashing lights, it really does depend what the trigger is, and that's where having those great conversations with them can give you that understanding. Also, individual evaluations should take into account the type of job, the required tasks, the degree of seizure control, their types of seizures, whether or not they have an aura, which is a warning. Some people do, some don't. And their reliability in taking their prescribed anticonvulsant medication, any side effects they might have from the medication. That's another very, very big side of it is, you know, if you've got people who've been on anticonvulsants because they have to for a very long time, the impact those medications can have on them, and any other accommodations which would help the person do their job and to feel safe and comfortable in the workplace. So yeah, and then if they do have a seizure in the workplace, making sure there is a quiet, dark and non-busy area for them to be for a while as they come out of it. So thank you, and feel free to ask me any questions you'd like.
Thank you, Amy. And you can hear from that, Amy's story has its own unique factors to it and how she interprets that and what's important for her in the workplace, and being able to identify the importance of addressing that within the workplace. Moving. So, as I said, oops, back one. What I've said before is that, again, it's a life interrupted in ways that we're not, some of the people with epilepsy are not experiencing. And for us, it's and for me, like for all of us, it's about having a balanced approach to what we do. I'm a great person of saying that there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's just this thing called balance. If you have an approach to work-life balance, then work's always going to be your priority because it comes first. But so for me, it's about working out what that balanced approach is, and how your life is balanced in that, and for workplaces. So we've had a lot of people that have talked to us about experiences that they have had where they've been had somebody in the community standing in a queue in a supermarket, standing in a queue at a bank, being at a public event, and how really important it is that in our balanced approach of understanding what epilepsy is, understanding what it is to be supporting somebody in the community who needs our help, in terms of how we all live with safe bodies and safe minds. So just keeping that balance in mind and having that approach when we're talking to people and addressing them. So I'm conscious of time, so I just thought I'd just hand back to Stephanie. If there's any questions of either Amy or myself, then please, I'll stop talking.
No, thank you very much, Wendy, and Amy too as well, for sharing your extremely personal story with participants today. So if anyone does have any questions for Wendy or for Amy, please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit those questions for our presenters today. So one question possibly for you, Wendy. A webinar participant is located in Melbourne. So where would they be able to access training and information to increase understanding of epilepsy and how best to support people with epilepsy in the workplace and respond to seizures in the workplace?
So every state in Australia there has an epilepsy organisation present. There is a federated model which is called Epilepsy Australia, of which I'm the chair. Excuse me, that's my glass of water. With which I'm the chair of that. But in Victoria, the organisation you would speak to would be the Epilepsy Foundation of Victoria, and they provide very similar to what we do. They also do a lot of work. So you can just hop on their website and you'll see that. Or give them a call and they'll be able to address those needs if you're in Melbourne.
All right, thank you. Another question, does Epilepsy Tasmania have an office space people can visit in person?
Yes, both Hobart and Launceston. So the Launceston space, so Amy's sitting in the boardroom in the Launceston office at the moment, which is based at 462 Wellington Street, which is it 5 ways, Amy? 4 ways, 5 ways. Bright orange building at the front, and the Hobart office is based in the ABC building. So I'm standing in my office looking out the window at the mountain and the Rose Park garden, and there's free parking out the front of both of the offices, and then you can come in. It's best to give us a buzz beforehand to make sure that there is somebody here, but we're here definitely Monday to Thursday, and then I'm in terms of the training staff, they're in the office, both offices, Launceston and Hobart, on Mondays to Thursdays. So yes, you can physically come in, get some resources, get some support, sit down and have a chat.
Fantastic. There's still time. Everyone, if you have any questions for our presenters today, Wendy and Amy, both from Epilepsy Tasmania, please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit those questions. So Wendy, you mentioned, or you talked, or both yourself, Amy too, you talked about, I guess, people with epilepsy finding it difficult to disclose that they have epilepsy to their employer because of potential, repercussions. When is it appropriate for someone to disclose to their employer that they do have epilepsy?
I'll go first, Amy can jump in. Some people are very, very self-conscious about not disclosing when they're in interviewing process because they have felt some of those issues in relation to that. So they do then, if they are offered the position, they then have the conversation about their needs in terms of their epilepsy, and they've found that that's been but people tell us that that's a useful approach to do that. If somebody we have what's called epilepsy-friendly workplaces. So if you go through the process of doing that training and things with us, you will have a sticker on your wall that says that you're an epilepsy-friendly workplace. That can be on your front door as you're coming in for people, so that way you identify as an organisation for people when they're coming off the street that you're an epilepsy-friendly workplace, and that's a huge issue in terms of breaking down that big barrier in the first instance, because you're sort of out and loud about the fact that here's a sticker on my wall that says that, yep, I'm an epilepsy-friendly workplace, so therefore we will accommodate your needs. So that's what as I said, that's what we've been promoting as one of the services we offer, is become an epilepsy-friendly workplace.
Thank you.
I'd just jump in there and say that really it's also dependent on the employee, the position they're in, and also, I guess, what stage they're at in their journey with epilepsy, and their relationship with their direct report as well.
It's one of the things I'd also say around that, Stephanie, as well, is if you're a family member who is supporting somebody with epilepsy, it's actually equally important that you also talk to your employer about that, because they can understand that if we try to be family-friendly workplaces, most of us, in whatever loose structure we use that language, but knowing that you have a child at home, whatever, that has epilepsy, and then that it may mean that you need to be leaving early one day or coming in late, or having that flexibility. So it works for all people who are supporting people with epilepsy as well as the person with epilepsy itself. So it's equally important that both groups of people talk. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And with no further questions coming through, Wendy and Amy, I'll begin to wrap up today's webinar. So thank you to our presenters, Wendy Groot and Amy Lewandowski from Epilepsy Tasmania. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, What is Epilepsy and How to Support Someone in the Workplace. Following today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would appreciate you providing us with your feedback. Today's webinar has also been recorded and will be made available following WorkSafe Tasmania month on WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube page. To find out more about Tasmania's WorkSafe month and other initiatives funded by the WorkCover Tasmania board, delivered by WorkSafe Tasmania, please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au. On behalf of the WorkCover Tasmania board and WorkSafe Tasmania, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I couldn't see.